what's going on at the cellular level. All right, why?
Because
Remember what Miss Diana asked you guys to think about today?
some of the like the genetics, like the DNA, some of it got turned off.
All right, the DNA, yeah, the DNA, a whole bunch of the DNA is turned off. Once a vertebrate or a mammal has grown a limb, it tells it to shut down. After that, all you do is do the basic cell maintenance. There's no more form instructions for forming it. So the Hox genes, which tend to regulate those sorts of things, get completely shut down, so they can't grow a new thing. Any of you ever know a person who's lost their hand or part of their arm? All right, what does what they have left look like? Yeah. Well, I actually knew a guy once who lost his hand when he was young. And what he had was he had an arm and then he had a little thing on it, and it had little nubbins instead of fingers. But they were the exact same number as you would have had fingers, but he had little nubs because his body had tried to start to grow, but it didn't have the complete instructions to grow a whole new hand there.
Is this related to cell differentiation?
Mm-hmm. It's completely related to
cell differentiation. Do you guys remember how we talked about stem cells? Yeah. Right? And right. In the beginning of the embryonic process and how, cells differentiate, but then when we're born and then when we're an adult, that process has already been completed, right?
Now look at all the different types of legs and feet you see on all the animals around here. Now, here's a question for you. Are their legs and feet more different than their trunks are? If I gave you the trunk of a wolf and the trunk of a deer without legs or a head, could you tell which it was? No. Why not? Yeah, they look pretty similar. Okay, so think about this now. What makes different species different from one another in a lot of these cases are their heads and their legs. So the genes that say build a body, the trunk part, are pretty much the same across a whole wide range of creatures. The genes that say build a leg, those have to be different. This is why that when you're talking about something that you're talking about, you can't grow new legs. But when species are evolving or changing fast, like remember we talked about the dogs. You guys had dogs. How do you tell? How does a dog that has little stubby legs? What's happened to that animal from its wolf ancestry? Well, it expresses the genome, but it tells it to, it tells it to stop at the puppy level. Think about your puppies. I mean, how many of you guys have had dogs that have had puppies or have had, and what are the puppies like? They're small. They have floppier ears. They all puppies have little stubby legs, just like little baby humans have little stubby legs and arms. Do you have a question? Okay, so think about it. If you can tell an animal's body to stop growing at a certain point, it's going to retain the proportions of where it stopped growing, even for its entire life. So if you'll notice in there, what's the animal in there with of all the animals in there, which are the ones that have the shortest legs? I'll give you a hint. It's none of the ones we've actually been talking about.
Prairie dogs.
Prairie dogs.
All right. Prairie dogs have short legs. The badger has short legs. The beaver has short legs. The mink and the otters have short legs. So you don't get, can you guys think of a big animal that has short legs?
Bear, hippo.
Crocodiles.
Oh, big legs.
Hippos are actually one of the better examples. Hippos are one of the better examples. And again, animals that can spend a lot of time in water, like the beaver and the mink and the otter and seals and hippos, they can get away with having short legs because they don't have to run around on land very much. I mean, can any of you guys think of a really big animal that in nature that you can think of that has short legs? No, it's kind of hard because legs tend to be proportionate to the body size. So, when you think about this is a developmental thing. Animals that tend to have short legs tend to shut down the development at a fairly early stage. And this is what happens in your dogs. Especially the dogs that now you had a German Shepherd, right? Who was it who had the German Shepherd? Yep. All right. He does not have short legs, right?
She doesn't.
She doesn't. Okay, sorry. You didn't say what sex it was.
Yeah,
That's okay. It wasn't anybody's fault. But she does not have short legs. Now, anybody in here have like a short-legged dog? What type is it?
Dachshund.
All right, a dachshund's a really interesting example. All right, there's an animal that has a really long body. It has the body length of a relatively normal-sized dog, but it's got little tiny legs. So that there you had some sort of change going on in the animal to prevent to shut down its leg development in an early stage, so that it has exactly the same bone structure that you and I do, right? If you feel your dog, and the thing is where is your dog's knee? Here's a real question for you guys. Where's your dog's knee? It's way up here. Remember, if you feel their hip, the knee's up there. Because dogs walk around on tiptoe. Dogs and horses and things like that walk around on tiptoe all the time. So where's their ankle? So if you look at these guys, where's their ankle? It's way up high. Now, same thing with when I had my wolf puppies and was working with my cousin in New Mexico, I used to point out to them that I would tell them their feet were as long as his. And he'd say, oh, no, they're not. And I'd say, no, you're thinking of their toes. I said, I showed him where the wolf's ankle was and laid it next to his ankle and showed that the foot of the wolf puppy and him were about the same length. He was like 9 years old and the wolf puppy was like 3 months old. But they were about the same length because you have to realize where the different body parts are on these guys. Most of these guys do not have wrists in the way we think of wrists. Wrists are really important. But for most of these guys, having a flexible wrist would be really not a great idea. Because you can't run very well. Imagine if you had to run on your arms. With it as weird as your wrists are. You wouldn't be able to do very much with it. We can run on our legs because they're a lot more solid, the bones are heavier, and the structure of the ankle is different. But because our hands are the way they are and our wrists are so flexible, and a lot of you guys, you're probably more flexible. I can't bend my wrist back further than that. I bet there are a lot of you guys that, especially some of the women, that can bend their wrist back a lot further. Yeah, look at Diana, man. Look at her. You can tell she's a dancer, man. Look at that. Okay, so let's go on up to the next floor. guys want to know how they put those animals together that you just saw in the panorama, you can look at this is this horse here, and this is the way he's put together. You can see that he does. You're not using. Remember what we were just talking about the body versus the legs? All he is that's real is his head and his legs. Everything else in him inside is fake. Take a look. They didn't bother to preserve his body. All they save basically is his legs and his skull. That's the only part of him that's actually still the real horse.
In the fur, right?
Well, and the skin, yes. And so here's the way they put him together. See, they got the legs, and then they put the hide over it. But you see, his body, what's his body is actually just sort of a little barrel type thing. Now, the story is with this guy is this is supposedly the only survivor from the 7th Cavalry of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. When the Cheyenne and Arapaho and Lakota wiped out the 7th Cavalry, when they came to the battlefield afterwards, the only thing left standing from the 7th Cavalry was this horse. So the 7th Cavalry went left from Fort Riley in Kansas. And that was their home. So they'd gone up into Montana where they had managed to get themselves all wiped out. But so they brought this horse back to Fort Riley, and they kept him, and they took special care of him and everything. And then when he died, they wanted to have him mounted. So they came to this guy here, Lewis Lindsay Dyke, who the museum's named after. This guy's the one who did all the taxidermy of all the animals we've just been looking at. And they said to him, could you stuff Comanche for us? Or could you mount Comanche so we can do him? And he said, sure. So they brought the dead horse over here, and this is what he did. Put it together. And this was probably, I don't know, anybody remember when the Battle of the Little Bighorn was? 1876. It's a very important date to all Native people. And so this was in the 1890s when Comanche died. They sent him over here. The guy prepared him like this, and he sent a bill to the fort saying, you know, it's $300 for all my work to make him like this.
So what did they do with the rest of the bones of the horse?
Probably threw them away. Maybe gave them to their dogs. I don't know, but whatever. But so they said it'll be $300 to. You pay me $300, you get the horse back. And the Army said, oh, we thought you were doing it for free because we're such a noble people and everything. And he said, nope, $300. And so it's kind of like if you guys have a mechanic work on your car and then you can't afford to pay him, they kept the horse.
But $300 was how much back then?
Well, it was probably about a couple $1,000s today, but even so, you know, the Army had the money, they just refused to pay it, and so he wouldn't give them back the horse, so that's why the horses stayed here. And some of the students, they asked, I suspect if the people at Fort Riley said, okay, we'll pay the money, that we would probably give them the horse back. But I don't know that anybody actually brings that up anymore. Yes?
So today is this horse worth more than $1,000?
It depends.
Wait, isn't this like
To me, there's a long and complex social history behind this, because when I first came to KU, they used to have this guy up on much bigger exhibit, and he was they call it the only survivor of the Battle of the Little Bighorn was the way they advertised it. And then me and some of the Native American students on campus said, well, wait a minute, there are like several thousand Cheyenne and Arapaho and Lakota that survived the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So then to try to placate us, they got a bunch of pictures of Indians, and they put them around him in sort of a semicircle and saying, well, he's the only survivor from the 7th Cavalry. Here are some other people who survived the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And now, and basically, there was a lot of debate about whether that was appropriate or not. And so basically what they've done now is he sort of ended up here where he's sort of like in the hall. Like nobody really cares that much about him. He's just sort of stuck in here. And if people really want to come see him, they can come see him. Hmm?
So, because it's June 25th.
Yeah.
Yep. June 25th, 1876. So they're trying to be a little more sensitive to the native people about this. It's still not great, but it's a lot better than it used to be. Anybody have any questions about? But anyway, to see what most of those animals you're looking at in there are like this. That all you're seeing of them that's real is their heads, their legs, and their skin, and their hides. The rest of them is probably inside like this, especially the big ones. Okay, now let's go up to the floor. Here's an animation of what they look like when they were alive. They're swimming across the screen. Those are ammonite, those are squid-like, relative to squid. But what I want you guys to see is that's a shark, I think, or a fish. There's a plesiosaur. At some point, they'll start swimming through here.
Is that them?
Yep, that's what these look like swimming while he's alive.
Is this real?
Yeah.
Is the real bone?
Well, it's the fossil. The bones have been replaced by rock. Yeah.
So this is the real fossil?
Yes, this is the actual fossil. This is the Kansas State fossil. And remember what we were talking about earlier now with this guy. How long are his legs compared to his size of his body? Yeah, they're relatively small, and especially if you look at it, his hand or feet are actually bigger than his leg, longer than his legs are. Because here again, now it's like what you're talking about. He has the one bone, the two bones, and a whole bunch. Same thing down there. One bone, two bones, a whole bunch. So that he has the same basic bone structure that we do, or that all tetrapod vertebrates do. But in his case, because he lives in the water, he doesn't need really strong legs. So what he did instead was change his legs to flippers, which is what these would be like if it were a living animal. Now, one thing I want you to see about this guy is they use their tail as the primary way of swimming because their legs aren't that strong. Look at how fragile looking his pelvis is overall. But look at his vertebrae, especially in his tail. Yeah. What's different about his the tail vertebrae from the other vertebrae? Yeah, they have the bones underneath. You notice that where the tail actually starts, they have those things that are called chevron bones that are underneath, and those are where muscles attach. And if you look at, you see these are the neurospinal processes here. You have these too, but they're kind of the little bumps on your back. If you feel bad on your vertebrae, you feel that little bump. That's what these are. But look at his are really well developed, and so that's for muscles to attach above, and below he had to essentially evolve new bones that allow his muscles to attach in his tail, because his tail is where most of his body weight and a lot of his muscles are. Now, how many ribs does this guy have? All right, here's a real interesting question for you guys. Are these ribs?
No.
What are they? You sure they're not ribs? What do you think they might be if they're not ribs? Well, they serve the same purpose as ribs. This is what makes his body so flexible.